All right, CRPN Central, this is Dr. Fox. Please like, comment, subscribe. It helps the mission more than you know so that I can do more for you. Welcome to Monday, everyone. What an insane Monday it is, in fact. So I made a post the other day, and it had to do with a conversation I had with someone who they lost a patient. And they didn't lose a patient because of an SAE. They didn't lose a patient because of a complication with the trial. They lost a patient because the patient was sitting there waiting and waiting and waiting for the negotiation to complete. And I'm not talking about a month at a time. I'm talking about 6 months from the time something was awarded to the time at which it was approved and the site got green light. 6 months. And they kept telling these patient, hang in there. The trial is coming. Hang in there. The trial is coming. We're almost ready. We just need that contract so we can get the activation. How long, it happened. And the funny thing is, the green light hit. The site finally got green light after it was delayed, after all of this nonsense. And they got the green light. And the day before green light, the day before they could get that patient screened, they got the text from the loved one that said, "I'm sorry, but they passed. It's too late." And I made that post. And then all of a sudden, I got all these messages from across the industry about how patients lost their lives waiting for the negotiation to complete, waiting for some legal contract that has an arrangement between people, waiting for that to get signed. And patients died because of it. So we're going to go through TrialSide chats here. We're going to talk about the negotiations. We're getting into invoices today, but in honor of that patient that lost their life and for everyone across the industry who has lost patients due to a negotiation that has gone way too long. I just want to have a really quick moment of silence for those who have been lost. Okay. You will not be forgotten. And I think it should be a mission for everyone in this industry to eliminate this inefficiency, just eradicate it. It's unnecessary, everyone. What we are doing right now is absolute garbage. This is we're really, really, truly letting our patients down, not just the ones who are depending on us for these trials, but for the patients who could be living years from now who don't have access. So I don't care if you're a site, a sponsor, a CRO. We really need to be better. Okay. Welcome to TrialSide Chats. And I need just a second here. I do apologize. We had all right. So apparently there's some technical difficulties with TrialSide. What I wanted to share. Let's try a plan B. So welcome to TrialSide Chats, the place where we can come together as clinical researchers to try to talk about some of the challenges that we've run into and to truly, sincerely make things better, like actually make things better. We'll try this one more time. And then if it goes out again, we will, we're just going to try this. I do apologize. Thank you everyone for your patience. There's going to be a little bit of a longer one. So we'll see what we can do to get this up and running. But while we're waiting for this, I can go through the token things that I normally go through. It's the place where we can all come together, try to identify our challenges, and to actually make the industry a better place. Truly, truly a better place. It's a full disclaimer. I am not a lawyer. I never said I had intended to be a lawyer. This is truly the culmination of experience across the industry. So if you do not agree with that disclaimer, you agree to watch TrialSide chats at your own risk, to listen at your own risk. We can't be held liable for what you learn from here. But if you don't agree to that disclaimer, please just All right, StreamYard. Apparently you don't like attachments and showing things today, so we're going to try things a little bit differently. I do thank you everyone for hanging in there. So we're going to try this. All right. Okay, guys, help me out here. I apologize for all of the errors. So let's try this. All right, well, that worked. So we'll just have to make that work. All right, so just so you know, little hint to TrialSide chats, there we go. We're just gonna have to do that for the day. So ground rules, we're gonna talk about anything finance, very, very subject. It must be confidential, no questions about that. And there's gonna be no names, no organizations, only concepts. We're gonna target some best practices here. So I did have to move some things around here. I do apologize to everyone for the troubles, but we have some technical difficulties. So I'm still looking at the comments. Please feel free to comment. And as we go, let's do that. So icebreaker. First and foremost, I just started negotiation and they're already reassigning a CRO negotiator. Why? Yeah, this happens a lot, everyone. So it's a very, very interesting situation where you literally you just got the negotiation. Maybe you gave the first counter and only the first counter. And then all of a sudden you wait for a week, maybe a week and a half, and you follow up and they say, oh, I'm so sorry, I'm not on that anymore. It's been sent over to this other person. I'm going to connect you to this other person. So a little rule of thumb, and this is truly from experience, I've seen a correlation with this where if you are negotiating and you're negotiating properly, in other words, you change the contract and the budget in a way that is responsible for the trial, what happens is you send it to the person who is assigned to you, and they look at that and they say, oh, I'm just a junior negotiator, because they always start trials out with a junior negotiator and hope that the sites will accept them. If it is a more complex negotiation or the sites actually push back, they take a look at that and say, whoa, this is beyond me. So I'm just going to boot it up to the next level. There's like 3 levels of negotiator in the really big negotiations. And most of the time, you will end up with that second one. They'll assign you to a junior paper pusher. They realize, oh, they really know their stuff and they're negotiating. And so what they end up doing is they'll take it up to the next level, take it up to a manager level or a senior negotiator or a senior contract analyst or whatever it might be. And then you'll live the rest of the negotiation in there. Very rarely will it go to the next level. Sometimes it's the next level plus the sponsor. And that has to do with if the site and the CRO just are way, way off and they just can't find a happy medium. So isn't it ironic that the negotiations actually start with some of the least experienced people in the industry? They've never performed the trial at all. They are just given a list of parameters that they have to follow. And if those parameters are ever exceeded, then they're going to have to escalate it either to the sponsor or to a more experienced CRO negotiator. So to answer your question, if you barely even negotiated at all, then all of a sudden you got booted off to another person, someone might have quit, they might have gone on leave or something like that. But odds are there's something a little more behind there. Honestly, if that happened to you, then you were responsibly negotiating. That's not a bad thing. It's just a matter of how long it takes for that process to hand over. You don't want to lose 2 weeks, but just waiting on hearing that you were reassigned to someone. That's when it gets kind of hairy. So we're going to talk about the book today. There's the book QR code. I hope you can see it, everyone. I do apologize about the technical difficulty. And you can buy this on Amazon, or you can buy it directly from CRPN at 10% off, and we can even give you free shipping. So big congratulations to Brad on an official publication that validated what we had in this book. It is a peer-reviewed publication that talks about the best practices for finance at a clinical research site. Really cool data. We've always had concepts, but actually applying data to it was super cool. I would highly recommend that you read this, take some of the ideas into your mind so for your sites, and then maybe we can all come together and create a standard best practices for finances in the industry. Okay, so today we're going to talk about invoices. Favorite part ever. And I can't tell you how many times this has happened. And I'm sure that any of the finance people out there, you're going to say the same thing. But you sit there and you're like, okay, I have been working for this trial for like 6 months, a year, 2 years, and I haven't been paid a dime. And I don't understand why. And then you go to them and you say, okay, well, let me see your invoice history. And they look at you and they say, what's an invoice? Face palm. So that's why there's a very, very big separation between the auto pay, the things that are automatically in the EDC for payment based off of data entry, and invoice. That is a huge, huge, big line between them, because if you don't submit an invoice for things that are invoiceable, you just missed out on the money that you have earned in that contract. It takes a lot of internal manual planning for invoices. So that's just what an invoice is. It's a contractual service that requires a request to be submitted for payment. You're not going to get paid automatically, everyone. You're going to have to be the one to submit your invoice. This is just an example. This is on page 112 of the invoice. A very, very standard invoice format. If you've ever seen an invoice, this is kind of what you're looking at. You're looking at the official site information, likely a logo. You're going to have all of your sponsor information that you're going to email to or have an address for. You're going to have the invoice information, in other words, some kind of a serial number for an invoice. You're going to have the date it was sent and its due date and its term all up there. And then finally, you're going to have a list of all the things that you're requesting to be on the invoice. These are the invoiceable items that are referenced in the contract that you need to request money for. Odds are you're going to have some kind of a description. It's likely going to match what's in the contract, a quantity, unit price, and amount. You're going to have a total invoice value after you've summed everything up, protocol ID, PI name, site identifier, the invoice can identify who it is. And then finally, you can see the attached justification. So that's pretty much a standard invoice. We'll probably go into that again when we start the trial management part. However, this part of the series is talking solely about those invoices where you're in the middle of a negotiation. And while you are negotiating, that is when you have to look at that and think to yourself, okay, what is and is not? What should I be adding? What shouldn't I be adding? That's what we're going to start talking about today. And we're going to start with the administration pillar. So the administration pillar, generally, when you get a negotiation in a contract, your first offer is going to have a list of invoiceable items. It's going to look something like this. There's a total of 3 admin items that are generally on a first offer. You've got this study startup, you've got a study closeout, you have an archiving. And these are pretty legitimate values. You're going to see a lot of people trying to give you like a couple $1,000s for study startup when you're going to have to dedicate your entire staff across the entire site, to spend hours and hours and hours on end to get this thing started. And they want to give you a fraction of what it's going to cost your site. Same thing with study closeout. I guarantee you, for anyone who's ever been through a study closeout, you'll be doing a lot more than $500 worth of work. I almost guarantee. And finally, archiving, which if you're going to take the federal regulations for long-term document storage being between 15 to 25 years, essentially the minimum is 2 years after FDA decision, which is according to clinicaltrials.gov, which conservatively in the CTA is 15 to 25 years. You're going to have the sponsor CRO trying to give you $500 for 25 years worth of work. So this is very standard. If you ever get an offer, this is what you're going to see. And the difference between invoices and EDC autopay is at least autopay, you have a protocol, right? If it's in the protocol, then you have a guide. You can follow the guide of the protocol and identify what is missing from the budget. That's not how invoices work, especially in administrative and regulatory. These items aren't in the protocol. You just have to know through experience and through your site's needs what you need to add to this. Sponsors and CROs very rarely volunteer invoiceable line items. You have to be the ones to create them sites. And if you are ever in a situation where you just take contracts and you accept these 3 line items and get the thing signed, then you have just doomed your trial and you've doomed the trials for all of the other sites who are depending on you to negotiate properly for fair market value. So today we're going to look at ways to take these 3 administrative items, study startup, study closeout, archiving, and expand them into some way that is very legitimately responsible for the true performance of a clinical research trial. So first, let's expand it by the triggers. In other words, how in the world can invoices be justified to be sent? Well, there's 3 primary triggers that you can really do. One of them is like a one-time trigger. This is the startup closeout. It only happens once in the trial. And most of the time that's dedicated to like the startup activity, startup fees, and then closeout fees. Any other one-time thing, sometimes there's a recruitment bonus or like not a bonus, It's not an incentive. It's not undue influence. It is additional resources to expedite something or to recruit fast or to something like that. That's a one time, but it only happens once. That's the point. The other one is a milestone based. So milestone based happens either by time, like let's say you get something paid every year. There's something that has happened, whether by time or by service, that has created an invoice. So let's say that a patient enrolls and you have to invoice for everything in the trial. Well, the enrollment itself is the milestone. That's what you put on the invoice. Protocol amendments, annual fees, screen fails, anything that is triggered as a result of either time or by activity or service provided. And then finally, there's the whole permission as needed. So many times, especially in invoices, you're going to get something that says you're allowed to invoice for this as long as the sponsor approves it and you provide documentation. That happens all the time in advertising. There's been many case studies where you have a patient who's qualified for the trial who has to take extra travel time, like maybe they're really far away. There might be flights, additional gas, additional fares, hotel rooms, things like that, that you submit to the sponsor. They say, yes, I approve it. We'll pay for this. And then once you have that approval, you send the sponsor's approval plus all of that documentation of cost in for an invoice, and then that can be paid. So between the one time, the milestone, and the permission or special case approvals, you should cover the majority of the triggers that happen as a result of sending the invoice. So these are what happens in order to justify the sending that invoice. Let's talk about the provisions. So the provisions are actually the loopholes or the things that can actually break a trial. You may have a startup, you may have some line item, you may have successfully been an awesome negotiator, but if you don't look at those provisions, if you don't look at the red tape, the fine print around each one of those line items, you may have just negotiated something that is completely worthless. Perfect example. This one is just floors me, but the people who want to require that dry ice has prior authorization. You have to ask permission from the sponsor before using dry ice if you want to get an invoice for it. You've just negotiated a completely worthless line item. I guarantee you that anyone who is interested in getting a sample somewhere from A to B in a temperature controlled environment is not going to add into that process permission to use dry ice before doing that shipment. That's obnoxious. Other things to consider, and this is, the provisions are where you get the art of the negotiation, where you really know if it's going to be a successful trial or not. Startup payments. Most startup payments should be at CTA execution when you sign the contract. However, there are many CROs out there who insist that your startup payment is paid on site activation or green light. So in the case of that one from before, where if you had green light in April and you signed in October, then you would have had months and months and months of not only doing all the startup work, but also waiting to get paid until the sponsor just so happens to decide to activate you. We all know that sponsors over award. They'll award 150 sites if they want 120, which means that odds are there are sites out there who got the award, they signed the contract, and they're never activated. You don't want your money to be dependent on an activation that you have no control over sites. You did the work, you should be paid at CTA execution. Same thing with dry ice. So there's a lot of nesting strategies around the provisions. So dry ice, you could either charge per sample. Well, every time you create a sample and put it in a tube and have it stored, you could charge per sample, or you could charge per shipment, which if you charge per shipment on dry ice, then you're going to end up having to bulk ship, which means that you're going to get less money, which might be responsible if you want to associate it with a shipment. However, one thing that I have found is that sponsors will oftentimes not do that properly, because that's when you'll also get the requirement for invoices, requirement for prior auths, things like that. So you got to watch your provisions. One more example of many that we could talk about is, of course, monitoring visits, a big one. So monitoring visits are a huge amount of work. You have to schedule some CRA, whether it's on-site or remote. You have to dedicate staff time every single day that you perform that monitoring visit. Monitoring visits are often 2 days long, sometimes 3 very, very long monitoring visits. They're 3 days long. And then you go into the provision, you say, okay, we're going to bill for a monitoring visit. Oh, it lasted 3 days. And then all of a sudden you look at the provision, it says per report or per monitoring visit, which they consider to be all of the days that comprise that report. And they give you like $300. So you just spent $500 to $600 paying staff to babysit CRAs for 3 days. And then you got a fraction of the money back because you didn't negotiate it per day. Oftentimes, sponsors are also going to a per hour basis. So they're really, really starting to crack down on monitoring visits. They're worried about the sites who are manipulating the whole monitoring visit dynamic. But honestly, from my experience, you might really want to watch the CRAs, their sponsors. They're the ones who sign the monitoring log, go into a monitoring room, crank up the air, watch TV or watch a phone or things, and then walk out like a couple hours later and then bill for 8 hours at a time. So I would recommend, we're cranking down on sites for that, but I don't know if the sites are the ones that you really have to worry about. Okay. So the admin invoices, this is the administrative pillar. We're going to start going back to the pillars. So when it comes to administrative invoices, these are the items that support a trial's overall business structure throughout its performance. It's not necessarily providing the services of the trial or the contract, whether it be regulatory or operational, but it's all of that underlying stuff underneath that is trial specific, which is therefore not overhead. Remember, we talked about that with overhead, but it is absolutely necessary to perform the trial appropriately. We're talking the world of pharma, laboratory manuals, IT technology, which, by the way, I don't know how many, it's like 18 to 21 portals that every single individual has to log into now across the course of a trial. So it's huge for site-specific technology now. Study-specific storage space, like pharmacy shelves, or storing laboratory kits, or storing supplies. Recruitment and outreach. This includes chart review, everyone. So if you're going to be looking for patients, it's not necessarily operational because you're not performing the trial yet, performing the protocol, but you're trying to find the patients, you're trying to get them in the door. Supplies, that's dry ice. If you have certain inhalers, if you're going to do pulmonary studies, whatever it is that you might need has to do with the administrative pillar. Specialty infrastructure. So if you've got radiology, or if you have inpatient trials, or you have different facilities or infrastructures that you have to support throughout the course of the trial, this is where the administrative pillar comes in. Legal support. How many times has there been an amendment to a contract, an amendment to a CTA? You're going to have to hire people to process that. You may have to hire a lawyer to review it. So again, this is very, very important infrastructure support that a site is going to need to perform things accurately. And finally, there's many, many times, depending on the sponsor you're working with, an expedited activity. Again, it has nothing to do with the performance of the trial, but it is the addition of resources into the system to make sure that this trial is performed according to sponsor expectations, which means that it does need to be added. All right, so let's talk about stratification. So do you remember that one of the very, very first trial slides, those 3 line items, startup, closeout, admin, startup, closeout, admin, just 3 line items, and that's all that's in the counter? This is how you stratify that list of those 3 items so that you can responsibly negotiate for a budget. The first way that you need to stratify it is you need to do by time. In other words, before, during, and after. At any course throughout the performance of the trial at your site, all of that infrastructure for the administration is going to have to be covered before, which is in your startup activity, during, which is in your annual fee activity, and then after, which is in your closeout activity. So think about that. First, go by time. List all of the different services, all of the different departments and divisions that this trial is going to demand from your site, and then just break it up into before, during, and after. That means that your startup payment, that one line item, startup, it can actually be broken into 5 to 8 different line items depending on the research and the trial's needs. So we're in clinical research, we're studying drugs and IP. So I guarantee you there's going to be some level of pharmacy support that a site is going to need. And odds are your site is going to be using their laboratory to prepare samples to ship to a central laboratory, which means now you're going to have temperature logs, you're going to have storage space, you're going to have management and maintenance, you're going to have review of expiration dates, continuous management and maintenance on top of preparation of space, organization, labeling, on top of cleanup, return, removing of labels, getting everything done from the system. Before, during, and after are key for all of your different divisions in the administrative pillar. Admin, laboratory, technology. If you're doing a lot of radiology, there's a possible for radiology. Definitely IT support, because you're going to have continuous firewalls. Huge long slew of time stratification with your startup, your closeout, and your annual fees across all of those divisions. Now, once you're done with time, then you can go with your a la carte, your services that are needed. It's not necessarily a trigger of time, but it is a trigger of the demands based off of need. Dry ice is a prime example. You're only going to need to use dry ice if you're shipping samples at a controlled environment. Same thing with a CTA amendment. You're never going to know when you're going to need a legal amendment, but if you do, you're really going to need that as a provision or an invoiceable line item in your contract. And then finally, this is a big one, and this is one that's really, really saved a lot of sites recently. So now there are different representatives in CRO world that are being assigned that aren't necessarily CRAs. They're supposed to be like support, booster staff, site relations people, whatever it is. And they get to bill the sponsor for all of the phone calls and all the things that they do. So they are highly incentivized to take site time. And I mean a lot of site time. They want to almost treat it like a monitoring visit. They send you a follow-up report. They do all of this, but sites don't get to bill for it. It's causing a major drain on the industry. So it's important to have staff phone calls, sponsor requested meetings, things like that are not monitoring visits. Really, really have to protect your time on the administrative level and protect this time of your staff from all of these continuous demands from your stakeholders for that time. And so for that reason, you can always put in there some kind of a booster call meeting or a staff phone call provision based off of time. This is every 15 minutes you get to bill if the sponsor requests a phone call with you. a booster call, whatever it is, make sure that if time is being requested from you or your staff, you always have a way to collect the item. I guarantee you CROs are. So occurrence and time, you take that across stratification, and what you have is a really, really cool and robust way to expand out that list of invoiceables, especially on the administrative level. And so what happens? Well, I'm not going to give you all of the details, but do you remember the 3 items that were started in this negotiation? This is a very blurred out version of an approved contract that ended up turning those 3 items into 40 items. And it was signed. It was approved. So that's what I mean is when you are given a first offer, do not believe that those few items that are presented to you are the extent of the negotiation. It takes a lot of experience and time. However, once you do it long enough, you will start to understand what certain sponsors will approve and will not approve. You'll start to understand what certain trials need. You're not going to need dry ice for trials that ship ambient. You're going to understand it's like a little toolbox, all these things that you pull in and out to build the perfect budget. But you are going to have to be the ones to lead at sites. You are the sponsor and CRO are not going to volunteer these items to you. You are going to have to be the one to be the expert at your site to understand what line items are very, very important for your site. And I think that's the hardest part of the negotiation is the fact that you know, and you don't know what you don't know, which is also why I put the book together. I'm not going to put the entire book on this series, but what I can tell you is there's at least a starter list of all the different pillars that you can look at, reference, justify, and see if it fits your site well to try to give you what you need to survive these negotiations. And there's other processes and steps. This is just the first offer. There's steps behind here that we're going to talk about, the negotiation strategies that we'll have to discuss to try to counter and understand the needs of the sponsors as they send their second offers and things like that. But just for today, my big ask for you is to understand that those 3 line items that you're seeing are nothing compared to what your trial should be. And that's the biggest concern is you are substantially cutting your funds and risking quality and patient safety if you cannot take those starter line items and stratify them into what your trial actually needs. Okay. So next week is a really, really good start into the invoiceable items that we were talking about. So next week, we are going to talk about the same, but now we're going to move to the regulatory pillar, those reg invoices. And if you read the paper, up there, the regulatory invoices were one of the number 1 sources of revenue that were not claimed and a huge, huge sink in time and cost to the sites. So having your regulatory services fully funded at all times is going to be a continuous challenge for this industry. And I highly, highly recommend that you take this one carefully. If you're going to watch any of them on these series, watch this regulatory invoice one. All right. Conference is coming, everyone. Mid-October, SCRS, Site Global Solutions Summit. This is going to be in Orlando. Come see CRPN. It's booth number 920. And actually, I see that CRPN's getting neighbors now. Almost all of those booths are filled now. So you should take a look at the floor plan, identify what sponsors are where, plan your route where you want to go, and come say hi to us at CRPN, and you're going to see some pretty cool things. I've got my own idea of swag under development, and I'm looking forward to sharing it with every single one of you. All right, so there's the website, there's LinkedIn, there's YouTube. I'm sorry so much about the technical difficulties. StreamYard just it didn't work today with the presentation. So thank you all for your patience and your support. This is Dr. Fox. Please like, comment, subscribe, share your voice. See you next time.